Welcome to the Business of Story, where we connect you with the leading minds in the art of business storytelling. Learn from best-selling authors, Hollywood screenwriters, makers, content marketers, and brand raconteurs on how to craft and tell compelling stories that sell. The Business of Story is brought to you by Oracle Marketing Cloud, helping businesses use the latest marketing technologies to tell their stories and connect with their customers. Emma, which provides innovative email marketing tools and services that drive brilliant results. And by Convince and Convert, digital marketing advisors and counselors to leading brands and organizations worldwide. Convince and Convert helps you gain and keep your customers online. Here's your host, Park Howell.
Hello, everybody. Park Howell here with another episode of Business of Story. I am so happy you're here with us this week. As you might guess, we have another amazing story artist guest with us this week. His name is Christoph Trappe. He is highly decorated in the communications world, especially as it comes to telling stories in the healthcare industry. And he's written a real marvelous book called Get Real, Telling Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success. That's right, Get Real, Telling Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success. And Christoph and I had a great time on this show. We talked about a lot of different things. The three main takeaways that you're going to get from this show is all about having stories with clear intent. And that seems to be a theme with a lot of our guests, to have a very defined, differentiated position in the marketplace and then share stories with absolute clear intent, a theme to it. So he'll talk about how to do that and how to pull those together. Also, we'll talk about how to get people to buy into your stories. It's not just enough to tell a story, but how do you actually get them to buy into it? And I run into this all the time with my students at ASU as well as with a lot of my customers. I was once told growing up in the advertising business that, Park, you have to risk selling something. It's not just enough to be creative, you have to risk selling. And I think that's what Christoph means with this, that how do you get people to buy into it and then ask them to do something? So even if it's a personal story, at the end of the story, ask your audience to do something. We will cover that a little later in the show as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about workflow. It's not enough to have this intent to create great business stories, but how do you actually go about producing them, getting them in a workflow so that you can be consistent about them and share them with the world. So that's all on today's amazing Business of Story episode. Before we jump in with Christoph, I wanted to remind you that we launched our do-it-yourself brand strategy workbook a couple months ago now, and it has been selling like hotcakes. You can still get it for just $20, but only for a limited time. Come in about another month, we are going to be increasing that price considerably, but we've been getting great feedback on it, and it literally helps you define and clarify your brand story from your positioning in the marketplace to your audiences, your top three audiences, creating your unique value proposition. It'll even show you how to do a SWOT analysis around your stories, so where are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as it relates to your stories, storytelling, and where you share them. All the way up to defining your brand personality, purpose, and your overall brand statement. So go to businessofstory.com and download your DIY, do-it-yourself guide to crafting and telling compelling brand stories that sell. Now, one last thing before we get going on today's show, and something that I always like to do just to start my day, and you'll appreciate this, I think, is I go to iTunes and check out what people are saying about the show. And I am so honored and so pleased that we are getting such high ratings and rankings with wonderful listeners out there just like you. So I got to share a couple of these with you. And I know it probably sounds like I'm a little braggadocious, but it just makes my day. And I want to let you know what some of the folks are saying out there. So I'm on iTunes right now. I am scrolling through it, and I want to, here's one from Mar Brown. I love this podcast, he says. It's my absolute favorite, and I look forward to it every week. I am a forever student in story, strategy, and business, and this podcast always inspires me. I've bought a few of the guest books as well. Great podcast. Thank you, Mar Brown. I appreciate you taking the time to letting the world know that you like it. How about W. Diggles? I love that. W. Diggles just found this podcast and listened to this episode with Sam Knowles. Sam describes how he helped his client craft the stories of their vendors. By letting the vendors tell their story, it is more believable and better illustrates the retail company's dedication to quality products and support of local communities. Very smart. Looking forward to more. Thanks, W. Diggles. I appreciate that, and that's what we try to do with all of our story artists and our guests, is give you real-time, relevant tips that you can use like right now to reignite that inner storyteller in you, that one true superpower. Let me finish off, and I do talk about storytelling as a superpower because we do have a way when we use it right, when all of us use it right in our communications, we can literally nudge the world in any direction you choose. So here's an example. This is the latest that came in. This came in from Israel, from an M. Elias. So, we're actually having connection with people in Israel, people that don't even know us, but through the power of story, it's rocking their worlds, and they're using it to rock other people's worlds. M. Elias says, I live in the startup nation, Israel, where many innovations are brought from conception to market. Park and team, through the business of story, has provided me with the key to unlocking the imagination and building brand awareness on many levels through story. I cannot get enough of the great guests you bring on each week. Thank you, Park, and the Business of Story team. Keep up the great work. So I guess maybe you can see why I love reading that stuff. It just kind of makes my day. And, we put a lot of time and effort and hard work into this. And I've got Jess Ostroff, who is just an amazing producer that helps me produce this. She's over in New York. I'm here in Phoenix. And we bring it all together to share business of story with the world and with your world. So if you like what you're hearing, please visit iTunes. Give us a rating. Give us a ranking. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like. And if you have an idea for a show or a show guest, please shoot me a note at park@businessofstory.com, park@businessofstory.com. All right, enough about me, enough about the show. It's all about you. Let's keep moving forward with today's amazing guest, Christoph Trappe. Now, let me tell you a little bit about him. Christoph is a career storyteller who has worked as a journalist, a nonprofit executive, and a content marketing strategist. He is a global keynote speaker, frequent blogger, and author. I had mentioned earlier his book, Get Real, telling authentic stories for long-term success. He is currently helping many, many hospitals throughout the United States share their authentic stories. In fact, the IMA named him Internet Marketer of the Year in 2015. So this guy brings that story ethic of being a journalist combined with now an internet marketer, a content marketing czar, and he's here today on Business of Story to share his tips and techniques to help you become better and stronger and more confident and courageous in your business storytelling. So without further ado, let's jump right on in. Christoph, welcome to Business of Story. Great to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me.
So you've got quite a background in communication, and in this day and age now, you are all about the authentic storyteller and doing a lot of work in the healthcare industry. How did you find yourself where you are today?
That's a great question. I actually grew up in the journalism world, so I did newspaper articles, mostly on the police beat. I actually went to school to be a sports writer, but interestingly, never ever worked a day as a sports writer. Went right into the police reporting, and of course, that's true storytelling out in the field. I didn't call it that back then. In fact, had you told me I should be telling stories over reporting news, I would have probably rolled my eyes at you. But then, over the years that evolved, and how do you tell better stories? How do you help brands tell better stories? And then currently I'm doing that in mostly in healthcare, coast to coast with typically larger healthcare organizations.
So how did you make your transition from journalism into marketing?
Yep, that's a great question. It just kind of happened. There was an opportunity to work with banks and credit unions, and then after that I actually went back to journalism and tried to teach journalists how to tell better stories and how to engage the community a little bit more. And then out of that came an opportunity with United Ways. So I did the same kind of thing, just with United Way, so in the nonprofit world, which, as you might imagine, nonprofits, just like anybody, any industry really, there's a lot of powerful and meaningful stories. And then, one thing led to another, and I moved that same skill set, passion, interest to mostly the healthcare field.
Interesting. So you went back to journalism and helped these journalists become better storytellers, and yet you would think that they would already have had those talents taught them and been exercising them. What did you see in them that you had to go in and tweak or help them kind of hone their storytelling gifts?
Yep. So journalism is kind of an interesting beast because obviously journalists have been around for a long, long time, sharing news and even sharing analysis of things. But it's different, right? They used to be the only outlet. They didn't really have to participate with the community. So I could have written a news article, and even though, out of fairness, I should get multiple sources and I should get as much. And bottom line is, a lot of reporting is still our perception of what's actually happened. And there's always multiple versions of the truth. So, some of those things, how do you connect with people? How do you get better answers out of people? How do you find the right people who actually know? How are you aware of your own biases? In authentic storytelling, I say there's really no right or wrong way to tell an authentic story because your version might be very different than my version, even though at some point they do need to be at least somewhat similar, but you have a different perspective than I have. And other people, same thing. So that didn't used to be a very common practice in journalism. So I tried to help them learn some of those things, and also how do you connect with people, especially on social media. When I was a reporter, you know how people got a hold of me? They called me, and sometimes if they didn't have my number, they didn't even call me. They called the receptionist, and then depending on who it was, she might send them somewhere else, or I talk to them. So today, of course, journalists, especially the larger the organization is, they can get reached a lot of different ways. So some of those things are getting more and more important.
So when you talk about your work, and you've got authentic before storytelling, and you see that everywhere, and you've got a book out on this, why do you feel the need to call out that authentic story? It's almost as if I'm wondering, is it like people are telling stories that aren't authentic and therefore fiction, or how do you describe that or define that moniker before storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. So authentic storytelling, the difference to just storytelling on its own is, I could tell you a good story, and it might be true, it might not be true. But sometimes people come up with stories, right? I remember the days way back when in marketing, and I know it still happens today. In some organizations, everybody sits around in a committee and in a room, and they don't talk to anybody else in the organization. They say, what is our message this year, or what's our message for this campaign? And they're basically coming up with either a slogan, or they're coming up with a tagline, or to some degree sometimes a story. Now, authentic storytelling, what actually happens is you come up with the story happens, and then you spot the story, and then you use that story to help advance your own story and purpose. So one example that's one of my favorite examples of all time actually happened with the United Way. And United Ways, they do a lot of good things, and and they're evolving as well because they've been around for many, many decades. But at this United Way, you had two girls walk in to the building and say, we'd like to donate these $60 that we made from our lemonade stand. And that's a really, really good story, right? But in a lot of instances, that story would have gone untold, because what do you do when somebody comes in and gives you money? You give them a receipt, and then you send them off on their way. But what this United Way did is they said, this is a really good story. Do you mind if we talk to you guys, maybe put it on our social media? They used, they shared that same story at events. And really what it did, it inspired other people to donate at the same time. And that's basically, first it has to happen, then you share the story. Now, it has to have something to do, quite honestly, with your goals, right? So if I'm starting to share stories around technology only, it has nothing to do with storytelling. That doesn't have anything to do with what I talk about or what I care about. but sometimes I'll share something technology related if it has something to do with storytelling. So, but bottom line is, it has to happen. If it doesn't happen, if we're just making it up, that's not necessarily authentic storytelling. That could be fiction or wishful thinking, perhaps.
And did you see that happening a lot in marketing world once you made that transition from journalism into marketing, that you felt like you needed to kind of, I guess, corral them a little bit, or give them the tools and the structure to be able to tell authentic stories so they're just not making stuff up?
Well, it is something that doesn't come very natural to people to first of all, spot the stories. And I don't know if this was a study or if somebody just, how they came up with the exact numbers, but the concept is totally true. Somebody said that, there's 1,000 stories happening around us every day, and the best storytellers, aka writers in that case, they spot maybe 6. Now, I don't know if it's 1,000, I don't know if it's 500 or 200, but I know the concept is true, because stories happen around us and we don't spot them because, it's not part of our autopilot, right? So it's part of my autopilot, but even I miss stories. So those stories, if we miss them, we will not share them, right? We will not pass them along. So first of all, I think people in general are losing or have lost that skill. So if you talk to children, especially like elementary school age, they still have that skill. And when you listen to them, I mean, they spot stories all day, and they share stories that nobody should be sharing sometimes, I mean, they say everything they want to say. And then we kind of lose it because we are actually looking for the right or wrong answer, versus what actually just happened. And yeah.
Without question, there was an artist for Hallmark Cards. His name was Gordon McKenzie, and he wrote a great book called Orbiting the Giant Hairball, basically how to keep your artist or storyteller intact while working for a large organization. And he was one of the founders of Shoebox Greetings because Hallmark loved him. He was a crazy thinker. They didn't want to lose him, so they gave him this outlet. But what Gordon did is, in his spare time, he would go into schools and work with kids, kindergarten through 5th and 6th grades, and his whole mission was to keep that artist ignited within these kids. And he would go into the 1st grade and tell the story of walking in, looking around the room at all the artwork hanging on the wall, and he would ask them, who's the artist in here that made all of this beautiful artwork? And every hand in the 1st grade would go up. And then he said he could walk 2 doors down on the same hallway in the same school into the 2nd grade, go through the same thing. Who's the artist that created all this beautiful artwork? And he said half the hands would go up. 3rd grade, a third of the hands would go up. And you were saying where this goes, by the 5th or 6th grade, he was lucky to have 1 or 2 people admit that they were an artist. And I think the same thing happens with us as storytellers. We were, as you pointed out, at the tops of our games in kindergarten, and our society and school, just social constructs, political correctness, you name it, just has a way of dampening that innate storyteller. So I think it's interesting how you said that we look for the right and wrong in the story versus what's truly the truth in the story and how does it impact people around us. Find that truth, share it truthfully or authentically, as you talk about in authentic storytelling, and you can literally move the world in any direction you choose. It's really that powerful.
Yep, and that is exactly right, Park. And not just the truth, but your truth. And, the other thing that I talk about in my book is it's okay to accept other people's truths. And, I was traveling with a coworker, and there was kind of a weird bus driver. And he said to me, and he was doing some weird things, and, I mean, no danger to anybody, just kind of his own character. And this my coworker said, hey, you should blog about this. And I'm like, why would I ever blog about that? That's, who cares, like whatever. And I actually did end up blogging about it. And I didn't blog about how I didn't judge his weirdness, which it was weird, but I blogged about how we just need to accept other people's stories. And if you think about it, whether that guy was singing and doing whatever he was doing, it's up to him. It didn't affect me. It didn't put me in any kind of bodily danger. It was barely annoying. It wasn't even annoying. It was just kind of like, okay, whatever. But what people do is they actually, we judge, right, really, really quickly. And that's why that happens, because we don't want to be judged. And then, of course, that's why we lose that storytelling with our own truth in mind. And then the other thing is we're actually taught in school to look for the right answer. So we're looking, what's the right answer? And then whoever gets it first wins, right? Because whoever raises their hand first wins. So those are some of the factors that I've seen that come in play here.
The messy business of storytelling. I was just in Chicago last week. I did a 2-day story workshop, a business of story workshop with the American Marketing Association, and they had about 10 different member companies in, and I worked with these folks. And it was really amazing to see the transition that they went through from the beginning of the presentation, the workshop, and the expectations they already had of their presenter going on and on and on and on and on, and hoping to get something out of it, where in reality mine is very, very hands-on, very immersive. But they literally went from sort of pent-up business people to, by the time I got done with them, it was fun to see the kid in them. I mean, they all of a sudden kind of let the shackles loose of everything that they've been constrained with in their communications and storytelling. And we're talking about people from university, from insurance, healthcare, from hospital. I mean, we had them across the board. But it was really fun, Cristoph, to see them when I gave them permission to go back in and reignite that inner storyteller from when they were kids, and I was going to show them how to now apply that to their businesses. It was so much fun. I mean, it was just so rewarding to see them regress into that kid and then come back out and show them how they were able to, or watch them actually tie those two worlds together of being that, that very open storyteller into the business world. And all of a sudden, there were just aha moments going on with them, like, wow, that is an amazing story. How did we miss that? And how do we tell it? And what are better ways? And then I think what I've seen with them is it becomes like a gold mine of opportunities. They just start seeing these stories popping up around them when they stop viewing them from their business brain and they start viewing them, I think, as you were saying, from their non-judgmental, more empathetic brain.
Yep, absolutely. But it has to become a habit. If you don't make it a habit, you go right back to how you used to do things beforehand. The permission thing was kind of interesting. There's 2 ways to actually do it in organizations. The first one is to get buy-in and permission from the executive level, right? And so you get some cover, you hopefully get some funding early on. And then the second way is, and even in that way, you need buy-in from people on other levels of the organization, because let's be honest, the C-level or even VP level, they will not be exposed to a lot of the stories that need to be shared. The other way is you have somebody further down who just kind of has free reign for a little bit, and they'll try to make it work. The problem with that second approach, even though I've seen it work, is they don't necessarily have the explicit buy-in, so it can be kind of dangerous, right? Because if you don't make it work as quickly as other people would like it to work, you might be out of a job, or who knows what might happen. But those are typically the 2 ways that I've seen that work.
Well, some of the success we've had, I teach a program at Arizona State University for executive masters, and I teach them power of communication and storytelling, and most of this is happening internally because it's within the School of Sustainability, so we're working with executives who are trying to create internal change in their organizations. And what I have found successful is once they get their story straight in 2 different levels. As a leader, why are they pursuing this social initiative? What personally is their involvement? Why are they, so bought into it? As Simon Sinek says, people buy the why you do versus the what and the how you do. And then number 2 is getting their story straight about what that initiative is and how it impacts the organization. And quite often, before they level it up to the C-level suite, I ask them to go up and marshal the troops of the foot soldiers around them and get the people, test their concepts, test their story on the rank and file within the organization, refine it there, get some backers behind it, and then level that story up in the C-level suite to, hopefully, as you're saying, to get them to buy into it. Have you seen the same thing? I know healthcare can be a pretty restrictive place to work a lot of times with all those very, very smart doctors and nurses and so forth. Do you find it a struggle for them to embrace the softer side of communications, that is storytelling?
It can be, but physicians are experts in their fields. So the more they share some of those that information, the better it is for everybody. You know, there was an article published on Kevin MD's blog. I don't remember how long ago. It has been a few months. And somebody was talking about how Dr. Google is always wrong, right? Because you search for something and it's like, oh my God, I'm going to die of what? It doesn't make any difference what you search for. And that's because a lot of people are sharing a lot of content out there. So my response to that blog post actually was, you know, Dr. Google will only be right if we start sharing what's actually right. So, and we need the physician's help to do some of those things. Now, they can do it. Sometimes you have to get a little more, you should have to show a little bit more of the value, but I've seen, you know, many of them can do it. It also fits in with empathy. So if you see like the Cleveland Clinic, they have an entire program around patient experience, and it talks about how do you communicate with patients, how do you show empathy, how do you feel empathy, and all those different things. So it has been kind of a shift in the last decade or so, right? That we focus on that a little more, on how do we share things that are relevant, and then of course how do we tie it all back to the patient experience overall, and even population health, which is still a fairly new concept. But how do we keep the population healthy? We keep them healthy, first of all, when they come in, right? We help them right then, but the majority of the population never actually comes in, right? So you have to educate them before you ever see them. And that's a great way for physicians to do that, and to think about it too. You know, how do we, what are the things to share? And not everybody can write about the 4 signs of heart attack. I mean, if I see one more article in Heart Month about the 4 signs of heart attack, I mean, really, like, you know, it's like you have to share something that's unique and that helps you help your population and your patients. And not everybody is a patient, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Well, I'd like to take a break right now for some of our sponsor stories, because we are very blessed to have some great sponsors. But when we come back, I'd like to talk a little bit about your book, Get Real, Telling Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success, how that came about, and what will the readers find in that? How can that help them move their stories forward faster within their organization? So let's cover that right after these messages. Hey, if you like what you're hearing here on Business of Story, then you are going to love Definitive, the email from Convince and Convert that many marketers say is the most useful resource around. Each day, the team at Convince and Convert picks a topic and sends you the 3 best resources ever created about that topic. It's topical, it's timely, it's useful, so go to definitivedigest.com and subscribe for free right now. To tell effective business stories means to truly understand your audience, beckon them in with a story they care about, convert them into a customer, and then nurture that relationship for lifelong brand bonding. That's not always easy to do, but marketing automation has made it easier than ever. The challenge is, how do you take all that data and turn it into drama? Well, the marketing gods over at Oracle Marketing Cloud have done that for us. They've created this easy-to-read and easy-to-digest guide called Marketing Automation Simplified Guide. It offers an introduction to the 5 tenets of modern marketing and breaks down the tips marketers need to know to automate and optimize. This includes data in targeting, email marketing, lead nurturing, lead scoring, content marketing, and sales enablement. So to get your free Oracle Marketing Cloud Guide, Marketing Automation Simplified, go to bit.ly/Oracle Automation. That's bit.ly/Oracle Automation, and start getting your brand story straight. Welcome back to Business of Story, and our guest today, Christoph Trappe. Christoph has come through the world of journalism into marketing, has been doing some really amazing work, especially in healthcare, around authentic storytelling. And Christoph, it's so great to have you here. I want to talk about your book, the book Get Real, Telling Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success. Now, what will readers find within this book, and how can they use it to help amplify their storytelling in business?
Yeah, you bet. So the book came out late 2015, and it's really just a step-by-step guide on how do you share authentic stories, how do you come up with them, why do you want to, how do you measure success, and at what stage do you want to measure it? How do you scale it in organizations? It's really large organizations to smaller organizations to one person, shops. So that's really the overview. It's based on my blog, authenticstorytelling.net. So yeah, it gives you a step-by-step guide on how do you go about storytelling.
So how do people find the stories within their organizations? You got a tip or a couple, 3 different ways of doing that?
Yep, of course. So first of all, you have to really get buy-in from the frontline staff and their participation. And a lot of times what I see is that people don't want to highlight their own stories. So while you and I might go willingly on social media and say, oh, here's what we just did today, here's a picture of me at the gym or whatever, we share whatever we want to. But a lot of people don't want to do that because they feel like they're bragging, their successes, some of those things. So, one tip actually to get frontline staff to buy in is to recognize people you work with. So instead of me saying, here's the greatest thing I've done today, somebody else needs to recognize it, and then they share it on my behalf. Story shopping is really important. As I mentioned before the break, lots of stories happening around us. We don't recognize them because we're too busy thinking about other things. So the more we can get that into people's minds to think about, not window shopping, but story shopping, right? They see stories happening, and then the ones that are worth sharing, they pass along. Overthinking things is a big problem. People overthink, why would anybody care about the story? We don't typically have problems with sharing stories like at the dinner party, so that's something to think about. How do we decide what to share when we're having dinner with somebody else? Same thing here. Don't overthink if there's value. In a couple decades of sharing stories, I'm always surprised what stories end up taking off and what stories do not take off. I know there's...
Isn't that the truth? I mean, you can really put your heart and soul into a blog post, and it just lays there, and then you can knock something out over 15 minutes and a glass of wine, and it just freaking takes off. And there's no rhyme or reason to it, other than maybe you're a little bit more relaxed in the second one than the first one.
Yep, so that the time it takes to create something is usually never the indicator of how successful it'll be. It's very interesting, and people continue to look for the secret formula. And there are some things you can do to set it up to be more likely to be successful. We see that longer articles are now performing better again. Some networks, are not performing as well. But bottom line is, I've seen stories take off that people didn't even want to do because they didn't think it was worth sharing. And then when they finally shared it, they took off, and everybody was reading and participating and sharing, and even converting to whatever the next step was in that case.
Cristoph, do you have a couple, 3 tips that are kind of go-to tips that you use that give you that edge or advantage of having a story take off?
Conflict is always good. If there's some conflict that happened in the story, something that was overcome, that's really, really good. If it solves a problem, for example, even this is not even a story with a lot of conflict, but Facebook Live notifications. So when somebody goes live on Facebook, the default setting appears to be that people get notification that somebody went live, and that can actually be really, really annoying, depending on who it is, because you might not need to know that somebody you haven't heard from in a while is now live on Facebook on video. So I actually, when I first came out, I wrote an article that explained how to turn Facebook Live notifications off, which is not, it has gotten easier, but it didn't used to be very easy. So people are still searching for that, and they're reading my article on how to turn it off. Now, what I did with that article, and it's definitely one I would consider that has taken off, is it solved a problem, right? Because people were getting notifications over and over and over and over, and they couldn't figure out how to turn it off. Mm-hmm. And so I told them how to do it. Now, it took me like 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours, to figure out how to turn it off, because you can't do it on your phone. You have to go to the desktop. Of course, when you get to your desktop computer, the notification has disappeared because you already looked at it. And then you have to hover in a specific spot to get the unsubscribe feature button. So a little sneaky.
So the conflict that you're playing into in your readers' lives are really twofold. Number one, this is conflicting to me because it's a pain in the ass. It's annoying. I don't want this thing to keep popping up. Number two, I have no idea how to do it. So there's additional conflict on top of it, so they feel a little bit trapped, and then you come in and say, all right, I spent the 3 hours. I did figure it out. Here's your story. So you really have sort of a functional narrative on how to do it, but the story goes beyond what you actually put on words. It's what people are actually experiencing. So you are sort of embedding yourself into their story with kind of a how-to manual of how to get over this conflict, essentially.
Yep, exactly. And then I haven't looked at that article in a while, but I'm pretty sure I even mentioned that, this seemed like a Saturday well spent or something like that, so it's not just a how-to, but I'm kind of inserting my own struggle into what was going on.
Well, and you're creating empathy when you do that too, because you're saying, I get you. I understand what you're going through because I'm going through the same thing. Let me spend the time and effort to figure out how to do it, and I'll guide you through this process. So, and I think this is really interesting to point out because so often on this show we talk about story and story structure and how to write a good story. This goes a little bit deeper into how to recognize and appreciate a story your audience is currently living right now, and you happen to be a character that comes in and helps them out and guides them through it. So your post may not even been like true story structure, but how you approached it of solving that problem, the conflict was already inherent in the story and what people were feeling and going through, and you just, like I said, brought in this guidepost to help them get through it. That might be some of the most powerful storytelling going because you are meeting them where they are at versus just sharing a story with them.
Yep, and the other thing that was interesting about that whole article was that I am a big fan of keyword research. You can now see what's starting to take off, what's starting to trend, all those different things. You can see projections. But when I first wrote about it, Facebook Live was so new, like nobody was even searching for it. But really, what I did, I was thinking, hey, it's a problem to me. It might be a problem to somebody else, and I'm just going to write it down and share it. So it's good to do research, and it's good to look at metrics, and it's good to see what keywords are projected to take off. But the bottom line on the story is do it, but don't overthink it. Because, whatever it is, 15% or 20% of, all the searches every day are new anyways. But when I wrote about it, there was nobody searching for it, because it wasn't a problem, because hardly anybody had Facebook Live. So a good story is a good story, even if nobody is searching for it today. So you do have to kind of think about that as you are living those stories. And sometimes you don't know.
Right. So let me ask you, again, going back to your healthcare discipline that you work in, and I've been in and around that myself quite a bit, and I do find that doctors can be a struggle to work with because they are so analytical, so science-based, right and wrong, and rightly so, by the way, because they literally are saving lives out there. But in my experience, I have found it difficult for them to truly embrace that right brain side, that human side of storytelling. What tips can you give to our listeners that are working in very highly intellectual realms and industries to be able to get them to insert story into it, get people to buy into story, and literally turn this data into drama and have greater connection in the process?
Yeah, so you just have to get them involved and you have to start talking to them. It's like an ongoing educational process. So you can't just say, we now want you to share your stories, and they say, oh, we already do that. We write journal articles. But you have to kind of take them by the hand and show them how to do it. And sometimes, there's always a nice debate going on out there in the content marketing world on, is it okay if people ghostwrite for you? That's a great tool for physicians. So instead of them writing something in their voice that nobody will understand because, they're just talking at a different level. They use different language. You might need somebody who is ghostwriting for them, right? And they're interviewing them and pulling those stories out of them, and then they put them in the right format. The trick is to figure out how to explain it to them in a way that they'll remember. And the most important thing is that they actually they respect whoever's talking to them. So if I just stop by and say, oh, I'm getting some content to share your story, and whatever the medium might be, could be a blog post, could be social, could be a news release, could be whatever, a white paper, but they need to actually believe you and have and believe that you are the expert in what you're talking about. So when I talk to physicians, a lot of times it's not so much about getting the stories, but more so to get the actual education out of the way with them, right? So I'm explaining to them why we need to be doing certain things, why do we need to use simple language, and I think some of those things are kind of sorting them out a little bit, and fewer people are questioning that that's actually important. But it is definitely a learning experience, and there is a framework and a step-by-step thing you kind of have to go through it. Sometimes when I see people do it and they're not actually, something isn't working, I can usually figure out, what didn't work or why something was going wrong. So you kind of, there's a step-by-step thing you can go through and see how it works.
And you have a framework that you take them through. It's kind of like ours is the story cycle, which is based off of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and boiled it down to these 10 steps. And I find when I take them literally by the hand and they fill out each step, these are content buckets of really, really important content. They also, in and of themselves, if you follow them step by step, you could tell literally a perfect story or a foolproof story, I would say. It works almost every time, but they can also mix up the steps if they want to and change it and create really their own unique story, as long as these 10 elements are apparent in the story. Is it you have a similar framework, something like that you work with these very analytical minds so that you put structure around the softness of story?
Yep, absolutely. And a lot of times it's really important to not just hand it over to them and have them do it. People are very, very busy, so you do kind of have to walk them through the framework step by step, and that's actually, I think, where marketers, brand journalists, content marketers will become more and more important down the road, because everybody is busy. So you can you make sure people buy in and people understand what you're trying to do, but you're actually helping them share those stories. Not everybody can, somebody said to me, somebody asked, Christoph, would you recommend all these pictures on the blog? Like, your blog doesn't have very many pictures. And I said, well, that is correct. My blog does not have very many pictures, but here's how it's a one-person blog. I blog on the airplane, you know what I mean? A lot of the things I blog about, there's no visual representation of what I'm even talking about. And, could I get stock art every time? Sure, I could, but a lot of times there's nothing that can show what I'm talking about. So I'm going to publish it even without a picture. But if you're, a multi-hospital system, you should totally always look for some kind of pictures, and you should make it look as nice as you can. But you kind of walk them through it, and you kind of have to make it easy for the expert, for sure.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, let us take one more break here, and when we come back for the wrap of the show, I'm going to put you on the spot here. What are your top 3 storytelling tips for the business world out there? Let's cover those when we come back after these stories from our sponsor.
Hey, I've got a question for you. What's the best call to action button color on your website? Yeah, you probably didn't see that one coming, did you? Well, what's the best shape and sizes of your CTA buttons? And what copy gets more clicks? These questions have interrupted my sleep patterns for weeks now, until I downloaded a helpful new email marketing guide from Emma called Why We Click: The Psychology Behind a Great Call to Action. You'll learn how applying just a little bit of brain science can transform your CTA buttons into small but mighty conversion powerhouses. It covers the button color, copy, and placement that helps skyrocket click rates. Check it out at myemma.com/click. Emma helps marketers everywhere send smart, stylish email newsletters, promotions, and automated campaigns, and help us all rest a little easier knowing our email marketing is doing its job. So check out their new publication at myemma.com/click.
Welcome back to Business of Story, and our guest today, author and marketing strategist, authentic storyteller, Christoph Trappe, who wrote the book Get Real, Telling Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success. Christoph, it's just great having you a part of the Business of Story, adding you to the list of story artists we've had from around the world to help entrepreneurs and solopreneurs and businesses and executive directors of nonprofits. I mean, you name it, anybody that finds himself needing to grow an enterprise and the people within that enterprise, connecting them with story artists like you just to help them be better at telling stories, connecting with people in a very empathic, understanding way, and then getting them to buy into the story so that they can move their missions forward faster. So with that setup, you've been doing this for quite a long time, from a journalist to a speaker to a marketer. What are like the 3 top things that a listener could do directly following this show to continue to hone their storytelling craft, or as I would say, reignite their one true superpower, and that is of storytelling? What could they do?
Yeah, of course. So the top 3 things you really have to think about are, number 1, declare intent. So for example, I'll give you an example from just my personal fitness journey. I used to weigh 330 pounds. Whoa. And, I mean, I didn't even admit it. Like, just because I didn't step on a scale, it's not going to count since I'm not seeing how much I weigh. But of course, that's not true. So at some point, I had to declare my intent to actually lose weight. And of course, that doesn't actually get me started, but it does help me make up my mind. So you have to declare your intent to actually want to do it. If you say, this sounds good, it's the latest thing, we'll just wait, blah, 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 it will never happen. So you have to say it out loud. If you don't say it, it doesn't count because nobody heard it.
That's a point that underscores something that I always tell my audience too, that you just expressed there, is the most potent story you ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a good one. So there, you're declaring your intent. This is a new story that you were creating in your life to open up and live into.
Yep, absolutely. And sometimes we don't know we're living a crappy story, right? Because we're just so hung up in the day-to-day. So something to think about.
We're used to it. Yeah.
How do you? Yep, we're used to the crap. Yep, fantastic. Number 2, you have to get buy-in, and here's what that means. Even if you're a one-person organization, you still need to get buy-in from somebody. You just need to figure out who it is. So, for example, even on my own blog, I need to get buy-in from my boss, even though she doesn't approve anything. I don't show anything to her, but you still need to get some kind of buy-in that it's actually okay to blog, or where are the boundaries when you shouldn't blog about something or talk about it. Also, my wife, I've blogged about miscarriages, I've blogged about all kinds of things happening to my family, and I'm not exploiting anybody, but I am sharing some not so positive stories on there when I think they're relevant to my readers. So bottom line is, I need to get some kind of buy-in from my wife. It doesn't have to be very formal. She didn't have to sign a contract that it's okay that I blog about some of the stuff that happens, but you still need to kind of set people up to, this is what I'm going to do. Any concerns, please bring them up anytime. And I know what I show to her and what I don't. If I'm blogging about the Facebook Live thing, my wife could care less. She does not want to see that. But if I'm blogging about something, that happened to my family, she probably would like to see before that goes live.
Well, and that's a really good point too on that buy-in thing. I've seen this in our students as well, is for whatever reason, we humans are very reluctant to ask for the sale, including getting someone to buy into our stories. But if we don't, even our personal stories, if there's not some sort of meaning to it that people can take away, and have a piece of that story that is their own now, or you're actually asking them to buy in and do something with you, it becomes kind of a non sequitur story. It seems to me that every story you tell has to have, as you said, number 1, this clear intent to do something and to get your audience actively engaged. If it's nothing more for them to leave with a new way of looking at something, they're now bought in or looking at it another way, or you're asking them to physically do something. And yet so many of our stories just end and there's no buy-in. It's like, okay, and then you get the old, well, I guess you had to be there. And if you ever have that, oh, I guess you have to be there thought in your mind after telling something, you probably didn't have that clear intent you talked about. And number two, you didn't actually ask that audience to get involved somehow.
Yep. And then number three, of course, is the workflow. The more slashes you add to somebody's job, it doesn't work. So there's some exceptions. You could have a social media / storyteller kind of role, for example, but social media managers / web managers / email producers / office assistants / whatever, it doesn't work. It only works in the minds of C-level executives because it's just in theory at that stage. So we have to think about who's actually going to do the work, who's actually going to help us share stories. We cannot just put everything on top of everything that already exists. Either something has to give, either we have to find new tools. The example I mentioned earlier, I blog on airplanes all the time, and now there's Wi-Fi on airplanes, so sometimes you just schedule it to publish later on. So what I've done is, it used to be, I remember when I traveled like 20 years ago, I'd have my little CD player, mobile CD player, and I would listen to music and read a book, and now I'm using that time to blog, right? So I found a new time to actually do some of the things that previously I would have had to do, at my desk or sitting, sitting in front of a computer. So we have to think about who's going to do it, how long does it take. All these things take time. I think sometimes writers think they take longer than they should. We don't have to research everything for hours and hours and hours and hours. So they can be cut down, certainly, but they do take time. So those three, declaring the intent, number one. Number two, buy-in. It depends on who you might need that from, but you do need it from somebody because hardly anybody lives in a vacuum. And then number three, workflow. Who's going to do it? And do they actually have the time? And if they don't, let's figure out how they can get the time.
Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. Well, Cristoph, thank you so much for taking the time to be here on Business of Story with us. This has just been great, terrific information. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, of course. AuthenticStorytelling.net is my blog, and also on Twitter at ctrappe. That's TRAPPE. Always happy to chat on there too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in today for another edition of Business of Story. If you like what you're hearing, please visit iTunes and let us know about it. Share your thoughts on the show, the programming. I just heard yesterday from a lady from Israel and the impact we've been having on her and her life through these amazing guests like Cristoph on the show. So to me, it underscores why I always say that storytelling is a superpower. So here is this professional from Israel who I've never met, but through the sharing of stories, story structure, and stories themselves, we've been able to nudge and impact her world. And if that's not a superpower, I don't know what is. So I encourage all of you to learn as much as you can from great resources such as Christoph's book, Get Real, Telling Authentic Stories for Long-Term Success, or right here at businessofstory.com, where we have a ton of tools for you to be able to craft and tell compelling brand stories that sell. So thank you so much for listening to another edition here. Tune in next Monday when we will have another story artist for you to learn from. And until then, have a wonderful life.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business of Story. Don't forget there are terrific free storytelling resources for you at thebusinessofstory.com, where you'll also find the complete show archive. The Business of Story is sponsored by Oracle Marketing Cloud, Emma, and by Convince and Convert, and is produced by Convince and Convert Media. Find more great shows like The Business of Story at marketingpodcasts.com, the first search engine for marketing podcasts. Podcast imaging by AudioBag.com.